session is entitled The Chaldean Oracles and Ancient Pagan Gnosticism. The Reverend Jonathan Stewart is a Montreal-based writer and editor, originally from Canada's East Coast. You might be able to tell. He grew up on Prince Edward Island and attended university in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is my favorite city in Canada, by the way, and moved to La Belle province, being Quebec, in 2006. After 4 years of writing 9 to 5 in a corporate environment, he's now working in the terrifying land of freelancing. What his bio leaves out is that he was born in Alberta. Sure. You know, I'm not sure if he's trying to strike that from the record, but I will never let him live it down. So he's had a long passion for all things Gnostic, esoteric, and mystical. And some of this started with him reading Philip K. Dick when he was 12 and moving straight into the non-commodity library when he was way too young to understand any of it. He came across the AJC in 2011 and has been in love with the welcoming and supportive Johannite community ever since. He joined the church in 2013 and was admitted to the minor orders in 2014 and the subdiaconate in 2018 and ordained to the diaconate in 2019. And we're hoping to ordain him to the priesthood some bloody year soon when he can be arsed to finish his seminary papers. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Deacon Jonathan, who, by the way, was born in Alberta.
That's right. It is true. I was born in Red Deer, lived there for 2 years. I say East Coast because I grew up in Prince Edward Island at college in Nova Scotia. But my wife and I are always joking that my obituary in the Prince Edward Island newspaper will not say that I was an Islander, but it will say that I was born in Alberta. So the eternal shame. Okay. So we are. I don't know how to talk anymore unless it's in podcast form. So His Excellency Martin Theos is going to help me out with this topic. It's going to be a really fascinating topic, and I do have to put the precursor on there that I'm not an expert. This is sort of and of course, we love saying that at Conclave and love saying it on Talk Gnosis. There are things that I know a lot more about that I'm close to being an expert in. This is not one of them. This is sort of book report style, but I think it's very interesting, fascinating, even important. So I thought that with this year's theme for Conclave, this is the perfect time to talk about the Chaldean Oracles. Now, I do see that Dr. Jeffrey Kupperman is joining us for this talk. I was hoping that he wouldn't because I'm going to say a bunch of nonsense and he's going to know what's actually true. So at the end of the talk, if anybody has any questions, the end of the interview, the end of whatever this was, address any questions to Dr. Kupperman. Actually, maybe also Joanne. I see Joanne's here as well. We're going to be, we're talking about the first couple centuries of Platonism within the Christian milieu, so you can talk to both of them.
The other thing is that Dr. Kupperman is free to just stare into the camera and make faces at Jonathan.
He's going to be grinding his teeth for sure. So because I'm going to be saying some ridiculous things. So everybody, I mean, this is recorded, so people, will be able to see Dr. Kupperman with the blood coming out of his eyes, with the teeth, ground down to stubs live in front of us. Okay, I was able to kill, 5 minutes of this lecture so far. I'm doing good. Your Excellency, how are you?
I'm good, Jonathan. So I just want to say welcome to the show. Thanks very much for joining us today. Before we get started, I do just want to emphasize to everyone that it's really important that you subscribe to our Patreon. That's how we get to keep doing this, and it's only through your support that we can carry on with what we're doing. So with that out of the way, Philip K. Dick. No, wait, hang on.
Oh wait, Your Excellency, I meant to say a blessed saint.
For Pete's sake, Tim, please, because that's too many syllables. Carry on.
It's a lot, and the team is just one. Team, a blessed St. John's Day to you, and
thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I just wanted to ask a question to you first before you start asking me questions. What does John the Baptist and Winnie the Pooh have in common? What do they have in common?
I don't know.
They both have the same middle name.
That is literally the most terrible joke I've ever heard in my entire life.
A blessed St. John's Day to you all.
And also to you. It will get to you eventually.
Yeah.
So, John,
If you were trying to convince people that this was a good investment of their time and money, I'm not sure that's the way to do it.
we're not doing so well so far. Yeah.
Okay,
so
Tim.
let's start out with the basics,
Yes.
Deacon John. Let's start out with the absolute basics. So what even are the Chaldean Oracles? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So they originally it's a book from the mid to late first century. The traditions, the records that we have say that it was written during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, who was roughly 160 to roughly the 180s. So it was written in that time period. Now it seems to be an incredibly important, fascinating, and influential book. You know, that's why we're talking about it today, influential, which is even the more disappointing that it has been lost. So what we have is 200 or so sayings from the Chaldean Oracles, embedded in as quotes in other people's works. A lot of these times, these quotes are quite short. A lot of these quotes are in the work of the later Neoplatonists, and although we have quotes, you know, going all the way from the 3rd century all the way up to the 11th century. So quite a long period. The other problem that we have with this book being gone is I said that we have these quotes, but the quotes often don't say from the Chaldean oracles. Sometimes they say from the oracles and from the gods. So there's a few that people are like, is this from the same book? And a lot of times they think so, yes, even if it's just from the gods, because the subject matter seems to be in common with some of the other material.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Let me just kind of just dig into the kind of the obvious trivia stuff, right? Like, so the name, the Chaldean Oracles, right? Like, so thanks for disambiguating the first thing, which is, do you say Chaldean or Chaldean? Because I'm pretty sure I've definitely said the wrong one before now. So thanks for that one first up. So why Chaldean and why oracles specifically?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and there's a few different theories about why it's called the Chaldean Oracles. So we'll start with it.
What does Chaldean even mean?
Precisely. So we got to talk about its origins, which also answers the oracles question. So the traditions that actually a lot of scholars think that there's truth to is that it was written or composed by a father and son team, the two Julians. So Julian the Chaldean and his son Julian the Theurgist. Okay. And it does seem that it was some kind of channeling. That's from the gods, possibly with the father kind of using his son as a medium in some sort of ritual, and these are being transmitted through him, or maybe the other way around, or maybe some other way of transmission. Something that's really fascinating, one later story that we have about them actually is that they come from Plato. So they're much later than Plato. The language is very different from the way that Plato writes, even though, as we'll talk about, these are in a traditional Platonic thought. But they come from Plato because one of the Julians in a ritual connected with the soul of Plato and transmitted these oracles. Is
right.
One of the stories about their origins. So why Chaldean? So a Chaldean is a part of the Chalcedon. Chaldea, the Chaldeans are the Babylonians. It's where Iraq is now. So very important ancient civilization. So why are these called the Chaldean oracles? Well, one theory is I mentioned the older Julian is Julian the Chaldean. His son is Julian the Theurgist. It's thought that they lived in Rome, and so some have theorized that the East was just sometimes called, like anybody from the East was called a Chaldean. So some people think that the elder Julian might have been originally Syrian and he moved to Rome. The reason why they think this is because of that habit of just calling people from the East Chaldeans. And also he uses some terms appear in the Greek of the of the text that are connected to, that seem to be the way that seem to be Syrian words, or the way that Syrians use Greek. So that's one. That's probably not true. Here's the theory that I like. When I talk about the Chaldean wisdom being very important, very ancient, even at this time, almost 2,000 years ago, it was thought of as being very ancient, esoteric, occult. So it's a form of Orientalism. And there's a theory that it's more than a theory, actually. We know this for sure.
Paleo-Orientalism, really.
Yes, exactly. Orientalism. But like the system, the familiar system of astrology that we know right now, that we use when we open up the newspaper to check our readings in the morning, our horoscopes, come from ancient Babylon. It's a Chaldean system. So basically, everybody who was an astrologer was called a Chaldean. So that's the theory I like the most. Is the elder Julian was probably an astrologer. He was probably a wonder worker. Maybe he was a healer, and he might have taken money for all of this to fund his higher pursuits, his philosophy, his search for enlightenment. Finally, there might be the Chaldean Oracles, again related to that Orientalism, just connecting it to a stream of ancient knowledge. For instance, they're sometimes known as the Oracles of Zoroaster. And just like there's a book in Cosmology called Zoroastros, and people are like, it seems to be named after Zoroaster, and it's like, well, is that connected to Zoroaster or the Zoroastrian religion? And a lot of scholars say no. Again, Zoroastrianism is a very ancient religion. It's further east than Rome. There's an exotic element to it, so there might be some Orientalism there about why it's called the Oracles of Zoroaster.
It all gets very mushy, right? Because Babylon was part of the Persian Empire at one point. Zoroastrianism's Persian. Like, what even is all this? Chaldean is it Greek? Is it the Greek word for Babylon at the time?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Don't look it up. It's fine. It's all good.
Yeah.
I'm just mining you for trivia, really, at this point. So this is like, why is this particular? That's all fascinating, right? And I swear to you, like 90% of the stuff that we deal with in these conferences, the question is nobody knows, and it's contentious, which was basically, if I can just summarize your answer for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So
well, I like all those theories, and the perhaps a legitimate criticism of myself or maybe some other people in our currents of Gnosticism or other organizations is antiquarianism, right? That we really like those little details. It's like, why is it called that? I find that really fascinating. Maybe some people don't find that as fascinating as I do, but it's interesting.
I like a bit of antiquarianism with a side order of Orientalism. Thanks, if that's okay. Just slightly.
Oh, go ahead. But I think one of the reasons why I'm talking about this, why we're talking about this.
That's what I want to get to, is like, why is this particular text super interesting for you? Like, what's really got your attention?
That's an excellent question. I wrote the questions, by the way. But although I didn't write that one. I didn't actually write that one. So yeah, it's an excellent question.
He did actually write a question saying, just riff on the questions, though. So
Technically doing it. Okay, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is understanding this text for me and delving into it and delving into some of the scholarship around it is part of my quest to understand what Gnosticism even is. Right? How did it work in the ancient world? Was it a small, quirky thing, which is what I kind of used to think, or is it vastly important and influential? So lately, I've been leaning towards vastly important and influential, and this text was very influential. And sort of my thesis for this discussion is that this is a text that is very Gnostic-y. Again, the mics are turned off, so you can't hear Dr. Kupperman grinding his teeth. So I won't say that it is a Gnostic text, even though it more or less is, but it's a text that seems to be in dialogue with the Cephians, with ancient Gnostics. We're going to talk about why. Like, they know their work, they're talking to them, they're interacting with the Gnostic mythology, right? Or so, as I said, this text is middle to late of the of the 2nd century, of the 100s. So it's about a contemporary of some of the most important texts that are in the Nag Hammadi, right? So that's when we think Secret John is from around, right? Maybe a bit earlier. Some people put it earlier, but a lot of people put it mid to late 1st century. So okay, so it's very, even though it's lost, it's very influential. So some scholars have called it the Bible of the Neoplatonists. Neoplatonism is.
You're saying it's also got connections to Neoplatonism.
Yes, it sure does. So it's kind of coming out of the Platonic world, of Platonic speculation, of Platonic religious speculation. At the time that it comes, we're still in Middle Platonism. We're still almost 100 years away from Neoplatonism. But some of what seems to be in this text, some of the mythology, some of the ways of thinking about the world, some of the things.
Sorry, John,
do.
just off the just off the top of your head, if you've got it to hand, when you say Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism, like what are a couple of figures in each of those phases that people might be familiar with? Where's the Iamblichus?
Yeah, Iamblichus would be Neoplatonist. Proclus would be Neoplatonist. Middle Platonism. Middle Platonism, you would have like somebody like Clement, right? Clement of Alexandria. Right. You'd have the early Christian Platonists. You'd have Numenæus, if I'm saying his name right, in Middle Platonism. So the text is in Middle Platonism, but it seems to be a precursor to some Neoplatonic thought, and the Neoplatonists seem to really love it, right? Because they're quoting it a lot. So it seems to be a big influence on their thought. Again,
so you're sort of placing it in a kind of a middle, like it's got clear resonances and connections with the Gnostic material that we're familiar with, and it's also got it's an influential text for Neoplatonism. It's got connections to Middle Platonism, so it's in this kind of liminal zone between the two things, right? That's part of the fascination of it.
That's part of the fascination of it, is that it is a liminal text, and we'll discuss more about exactly all the ways that it's a liminal text and how being liminal is very important for it. So that really fascinates me. And again, like some people seem to have the idea that Neoplatonism and Kabbalah are influences on Gnosticism, right? But it's the other way around. Like Gnosticism predates both by a fair amount of time. Now, obviously, Platonism and Jewish mysticism were influenced on Gnosticism, but it, we don't get Western religion, we don't get Western mysticism without Neoplatonism, right? Even if we're not aware of it, it's the model, it's the influence for Kabbalistic, Christian, and Sufi mystical reflections, and so that's really important. But maybe we don't get Neoplatonism if we don't get Gnosticism. Gnosticism seems to be an influence on it. And here we have this liminal text that's sort of in between all these things. I think another reason why it's important or fascinating is that it's, and of course, saying the word pagan isn't always helpful, right? It's not a very clear descriptive term, but we only have so much time, so we'll say pagan. It does seem to be a form of pagan Gnosticism. So, we don't have the Christian figures, we don't have the Christian mythology, even though they were an influence on it. So we have figures from Greek mythology. And most scholars don't believe in a pre-Christian Gnosticism anymore. I have some mixed feelings about it. I think that there was one, but this is definitely not from pre-Christian Gnosticism, at least not written pre-Christian. But it shows that the Gnostics were so important and so relevant right away that there's this response in the Platonic world, in the philosophical world, in the religious world. Like this text seems to be in dialogue. If you're in dialogue, you're responding, right? So in some way, it's a response to the Gnostics, although the Gnostics might also be reading it and responding to it. So make a long story short, finding an ancient pagan Gnostic text, very exciting. Gnostic text, I'll say, for Dr. Kupperman. And there's people now that could probably get some value out of that, right? Because we do have people in our communities. We have people who are very interested in Greek mythology, who are very interested in world religion, who are interested in non-Christian worldviews and non-Christian mythologies, right? So they might be able to use the examples of these texts, this text, to recreate or use this pagan Gnosticism. The other thing I can think of that'd be that'd be similar would be Zosimos, who's a seems to be an Egyptian priest, and he's very influenced by the Cephians, right? We talked about him on Talk Gnosis. People can check that out, and he's creating a non-Christian Gnostic influence mythology.
So using some of the same ideas and concepts, but placing it in a different religious milieu, kind of.
That's it precisely. That's it precisely.
Let's dig into a little bit into this kind of liminality thing. So you're saying it's got connections to, you're placing it as Middle Platonism, right? So it's got resonances and connections with Middle Platonism, and I guess with early Platonism, right? So what are a couple of specifics of those connections?
Yeah, I think this might be a good place to talk about the Platonic underworld,
okay,
quote unquote. And
what even is the Platonic underworld, John?
Well, I'm going to read a long quote from I believe I'm saying her name. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Dr. Ruth Majeric or Magic, and she wrote a scholarly book on the Chaldean Oracles, and she says that they are an example of coming from the Platonic underworld. So let's talk about that. Okay. The Platonic underworld, they possess their texts, ideas, mythologies, streams of thought that have elaborate and often exasperating metaphysical constructions. Okay, sounding familiar? Mm-hmm. B, an extreme degradation of material derogation. I can't talk. They're down on material existence. So B. Right. C, a dualistic understanding of human nature that envisions the soul or mind as a spark of the divine trapped in matter. D, a method of salvation or enlightenment that generally involves a spiritual and or ritual ascent of the soul. E, a mythologizing tendency that hypostasizes various abstractions into quasi-mythical beings. So I think you might be thinking all these might sound familiar. It might sound like some other forms of thought from the so-called Platonic underworld that we might all dig, right? That this also describes Gnosticism quite well. Right. So this movement away from the school traditions of Platonism towards an unabashed religiosity is the hallmark of these systems, although all three retain a veneer of philosophical respectability by assimilating elements from the eclectic Platonism of the day. For example, the highest god in all three systems is often described as a monad who either exists alongside of or extends into a dyad. However, in the underworld of Platonism, abstract philosophical speculation gives way in this point to mythic formulations, and a complex proliferation of cosmic entities is introduced, with a dominant female principle in each case, operating at all levels and directly responsible for material creation as we know it. In certain Gnostic systems, for example, she is Sophia. In the Chaldean system, Dynamis or Hecate. In the Hermetica, life or nature. Despite the abstract qualities of most of these names, a definite personal function is assigned to each. The Gnostic Sophia experiences feelings of grief and fear. She gives birth to the demiurge. The Chaldean Hecate generates life from her right hip. The Hermetic nature entices and unites with the primal Anthropos. Something that is kind of cool are these female figures that seem to be very important to the Platonic underworld in these interconnected belief systems that are influencing each other. And we're going to come back to talk about Hecate and the female principle and female principles in the Chaldean Oracles.
That entirely depends on how much I start ignoring your questions.
Yes, that's true. One last quote that I'll say.
So pause a sec before you go on to the next quote. So out of that quote that you just gave, like what are the sort of 2 or 3 key points?
I think the 2 or 3 key points there are, when I did the A, B, C, D, E, those all seem to be, I think, what most people think of as Gnosticism, right? Right. But
so this is saying that that's characteristic of other Middle Platonic.
That's right.
At the same time, they've all got this common family of ideas.
That's right. So this is the Platonic underworld that seems to be these interconnected belief systems that again seem to be talking to each other, right? So you would have the Gnostics, you would have the Platonic religious communities that are kind of based around theurgy, religiosity, philosophy, and generating texts like the Chaldean Oracles. And then you have the sort of pagan communities. I mean, another important form of pagan Gnosticism would be the Corpus Hermeticum, right? So they're sort of counted in here because there's a lot of Platonism in those. There's, I mean, that's quite a collection of texts, and it does seem like the texts really got a range in age, but some would be from around here, some from a little bit earlier. There's debate if they're Gnostic, but I mean, one of them is in the Nag Hammadi. Dr. April Taconic believes them to be Gnostic. It's less of a world-hating gnosis, a form of Gnosticism, but she believes that they're Gnostic because it has much of the same qualities, and again, is much of the same influences.
So we kind of, I mean, from that point of view, are we kind of imagining that then Neoplatonism forms as a kind of like attempt to kind of like get away from all this kind of shameful Platonic underworld, Middle Platonism, religiosity, and kind of reform Platonism? It's like a reformed Platonism going back to a more philosophical spirit of Plato.
That's an excellent question.
That's a question for a different talk, probably, but
it's a question for a different talk. I wouldn't really say that, because I think this is kind of the start of what Neoplatonism is, which is does have that philosophical focus, but also has this strong religiosity, the strong theurgical approach. And this isn't my insight, and of course it's controversial like everything. So let's talk about Neoplatonism being partly a reaction to Gnosticism. A lot of people, a lot of scholars have thought that Neoplatonism is also a reaction to just Christianity and the Christianization of the empire, right? So there's pagans, intellectuals saying, oh, well, we have this Salvific system, right? We have something that looks like sacraments. We have something that's theurgy that is going to give people direct spiritual connections. We have revealed texts. We, you know what I mean, onward and onward. So yeah, I think it is sort of coming out of that furnace. I think it is partly a reactive, not entirely, but partly a reactive movement.
Well, I mean, that's kind of how history works, right? Like there's always movements that are kind of responding or reacting or reforming what came before them. Yeah. If you were here for Scott's talk this morning, then you have the structure of that, I think, in McLuhan. Another fantastic Canadian, also from Ontario, probably. Never mind. Specific connections with Gnosticism. One of the ones that jumped out in your quote just before. Sorry, you had another quote you wanted to go into.
Oh yeah, it was just going back to the female principle, this specifically talking about.
Hold that for a sec. Let's come to the female principle as a distinct thing, and then you can maybe do that. Then I want to.
Yeah.
Is that cool? I wanted. There's a couple of sort of obvious places that are connections in what you've already said. So one is obviously the monad is this concept of the monad. Like, is that just kind of reusing a name that people are actually meaning in quite different ways, or is that a genuine connection? The monad, or the one, shows up in Secret John, obviously very famously. But so is that showing up in the Chaldean Oracles in the same sense that it's showing up in Sethian material like Secret John?
Yeah, 100%. So why don't I, and again, this might have some quotes, and this is where people are going to be turning it off and falling asleep. But it might be important to talk about, the beginning, the conception of the one, of the ultimate divinity, because it's shockingly similar to what you find in the Secret John and other texts. So the ultimate God, the ultimate one, who is referred to with a variety of different names, including Buphos, Bythos, which can be translated as abyss, right? Abyss. That's a name that we find in Gnostic texts. So the ultimate God is remote, androgynous, cannot be known, and it does seem like the Chaldean Oracles do suggest some negative theology, because this being is not a being, It's not that it's too big for us to comprehend. It's that it can't be known. It's a being that's not a being. It can't be conceived of. It's the ultimate. Okay, so it starts there, very much like in Secret John, and other Gnostic texts. Then it starts emanating. Things start happening. It starts thinking. So let me just quote from El Brisson. God appears in a threefold form. He is the Father, Hecate, and the Demiurge. Hecate, the female divinity, could be considered as the spouse of the Father and the mother of the Demiurge. The supreme God is remote, androgynous, cannot be known. Where was I here? Okay, so what happens is, this is where things get very complex, and there's debate. So about, because again, we don't have like the full mythology laid out and the full cosmology laid out. So in the beginning, you have
because we're only getting quotes and scraps, and we're not even entirely sure of the order of them. That's inferred, right?
Right. So in the beginning, there's the secret father. I think he is sometimes called the secret father. We can call him the unknown father in Cephian terms, but he's not a father. He's not a he. Right. It's the ultimate. So this ultimate within itself, of course, contains everything, but it particularly contains a triad. This is in one system. So a triad of the Father continued with its power and its potential intellect. Okay. Then it actually emanates a third triad of the dyadically orientated, above and below, demiurgic intellect. So it gives, something that is sometimes actually called the Father because it's the Father to us, or the first Father. Sometimes it's called the second intellect because I think there's even a quote that says it's the second intellect, but it's the first intellect to us. Right. This being would be something that we would think of more as God, not an old man in the sky, but when people are trying to think of a being, this thing is God. But it's also contains within it a triad. Between these two, a second measured triad identified as Hecate, representing the multiplicity that proceeds from the Father. Indeed, there is a certain parallel between the Cephian triple-powered one and the Chaldean Hecate, in terms of both the way that it emanates and its functions, in terms of its common triplicity, and in terms of a strong association of both with vitality and the source of life and multiplicity. So for connecting with the Gnostics, when they talk about this primal triad, well, we have that in Secret John. It happens almost exactly the same, right? You have the unknown Father, then it emanates Barbelo, who is female coded, but Barbelo contains within it a bunch of things, right? Another triad, so on and so forth. I think too, right away we can kind of see a Father, Son, Holy Spirit coming out of this, because you have the unknown Father, you have the demiurge, who the second intellect, the intellect, whatever we're going to call him, and of course this is a positive demiurge, and then you have the female spirit, who's known as the power, right? And this is sort of a description that we have in traditional Trinitarian thought, that the Holy Spirit is like a power, both in the divine realms and here on earth, right? It's this power that connects. It's this power that connects the Father and the Son. It's connecting power. So here we have this association. In this case, it's Hecate with power. The other thing as well is the names that and I have it here. The names that are given to this primal triad, which I think are being, life, and intellect. I might have that messed up. I'll find it in my notes. Are very similar to some of the triads that we find in Secret John, and they're identical to some of the ones that we have in the Nag Hammadi. So I believe in the Book of Zoroastros and the Book of the Stranger, Allogenes, they talk about a primal triad using the exact same words and the exact same Greek, even though it's in Coptic, but we can guess what the Greek originals are for the primal triad that is found in the Chaldean Oracles. So here again, we know that these are texts. This can't be a coincidence, right? So they're
No,
drawing
sure.
from the same Platonic thought. They're drawing from each other, right? Chaldean Oracles are possibly reading these Gnostic texts, stealing the idea for the primal triad. They're all reading the same thing. They're all talking to each other. They're like, no, the primal triad goes here. But it's pretty shocking to find it in that particular way.
Well, so does it have, so the key, I mean, a key aspect of that kind of early Christian Gnosticism that you see in the Sethian material is absolutely, there's the one and the female power, the autogenies, the unfolding and process of emanation. But then there's that critical moment of the creation of the flaw in the unfolding, right? Where the lower demiurge is created and the unfolding of the human being in the material world as an error or mistake or the consequences of a flaw in the scheme. It comes into a creation through disharmony rather than harmony. Is there parallel to that in the Chaldean Oracles, or does it stick to a more sort of positive Platonic line on the creation of the human being?
Right. So this is where you would get the strongest argument for it not being Gnostic, even though it has all these other qualities. And this is why even I would put the Gnostic-y on there, right? Why I have to add the why? Because I think that is a very important aspect of Gnosticism and for understanding what the Gnostics are trying to say and for understanding it metaphorically, right? Is that there is this break, that there is a cosmic mistake that the humans didn't do that is in the divine realms, that there is an evil creator that created us out of as a trap to hold the spark, right? And created us out of the metaphorically, right? We are made out of the world system. I think metaphorically people can kind of understand that when you talk about unconscious bias, right? Well, that's being made out of the world system. So none of that seems to be in the Chaldean Oracles. So that's why we have to add the why. So there is a complicated unfolding, what seems to be a complicated unfolding of emanations. There's lots of there's possibly lots of triads. There's a very elaborate chain of being. And talking about triads, so the unknown father, the emanations keep going, right? And as they keep going, things start getting messed up the further back, the further, if you think of it as a chain, if you think of it as someone drops a pebble in the middle of a lake and you have things rippling out, right? So that's what creation is in the Chaldean Oracles in lots of emanation style thought. Now, if you're looking at the pond, the ripples at in the center are tight, right? They're small, they're tight, they're close together. They're also not wavy. The shape of them looks really ordered and it's pleasant to the eye, right? The ones far out are wavy. They're kind of messed up. They're far away from each other, right? They're no longer close. They're messy. They're starting to break apart, right? The circle can break apart at the edge. So the Chaldean Oracles seem to say, so it kept emanating. It kept emanating, so 3 worlds were created. So we have the Empyrean world, which is the divine world, which is a world of energy and fire. I think it's described as a world of fire. The Chaldean Oracles are really big on fire. If you control F and search fire, you're going to see a lot. They're getting that from the Stoics, who see, and other Greek thinkers who see fire at the heart of everything. Maybe they're getting it from Simon Magus, who knows, who also was big on fire metaphors. So there's the Empyrean world of fire. Then there's a divine world under that, right? There's sort of the cosmos, which would be everything above the moon, if you're thinking in an ancient sense. And then there's the material plane, which is our world and kind of space below the moon. So you could think of it as 3 concentric circles. We're in the center, right? And then you have the next one. That's the next level, the next layer, and then you have outside of that the final layer, the layer of fire, or a chain with 3 interlinked loops, and we're the loop at the bottom.
Right.
So yeah, so similar to actually some of what seems to be similar to some of the Gnostic texts that are in Nag Hammadi and some of the ancient Gnostic groups. What seems to be similar to other Platonic groups, what seems to be similar to the Corpus Hermetica, is that this world is not a mistake. It's not an error. It's just that as creation kept happening and emanations kept happening, things get a little fuzzy, messed up at the periphery, and materiality is formed, and materiality is different than spiritual stuff, right? And materiality gets in the way of being spiritual, even though it may not be inherently evil. The passions, this book is big on the passions, like many Platonists and many groups and thinkers from this time, right? The passions seem to be bad. The passions cut you off from your true identity, and this is the world of the passions. That said, and we can talk about it a bit more. Unlike other Middle Platonic texts, unlike many Neoplatonic texts, unlike other texts that aren't Gnostic ones, this text is pretty, even though the material world wasn't created by a mistake, it may not be inherently evil. It's much more down on the material world than other texts. So there's a lot of quotes. One of them, this is from the Chaldean Oracles, is, "Do not hasten to the light-hating world, boisterous and matter, where there is murder, discord, foul orders, squalid illnesses, corruptions, and fluctuating works. He who intends to love the intellect of the Father must flee these things. The Father guides us, opening paths of fire, so that we do not flow into wretched streams from forgetfulness. And beware the turbulence of matter, by which many are pulled into twisted streams. Do not gaze at nature, her name is destiny." And I'll talk about destiny for a moment. They also seem to be down on fate, which is another Gnostic obsession, right? Again,
that's a very Gnostic obsession. Yep.
Very Gnostic obsession. So this one has multiple references to fate and destiny. It seems to think that it's a bad thing, right? And that you need to be liberated from it. And and of course we're going to talk about liberation and how you do it, but that is part of the liberation process is getting away from fate, which is, if you look at something like Secret John, we talked about it before. But for some of the cliches about the Gnostics being really hating the body, right? You look at something like Secret John, what they're really kind of on about. One of the things they're on about is fate, right? Fate and the counterfeit spirit is what they're really obsessed with. So fate, the counterfeit spirit.
Problematics of the human mind. So that quote you just quoted, the "do not gaze upon nature." I mean, that's a fairly profound break with classical Platonism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, because the nature is misleading rather than something that could lead you into an understanding of the divine nature.
Yeah, that's it precisely. That's it precisely.
As I say, I'm seeing Dr. K wince, so perhaps he's got a clarification.
Jeffrey, hop on in.
Yeah, please.
It depends on which Platonic text we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about like the Phaedrus and the Phaedo, this all sucks. If you're talking about the Timaeus, this is all created by an all good, loving God.
Right.
Now make those go together. Have fun with that.
Good luck. Congratulations. Right. Yeah. But as you know, Jeffrey, like Gnostics only bother reading the Timaeus. They don't read the rest of Plato. So,
He wrote more than that?
Hence the errors.
He wrote more than the Timaeus?
Yeah, no, it's like all Phaedrus.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can get the passion stuff, right? Like that's definitely with the chariot, that's definitely in Plato. So I think that, since we're talking about cosmology, we're talking about the problems, we need to talk about like what the human is. So the Chaldean Oracles is panentheist, right? It does believe that everything participates because everything comes from that primal divinity, everything partakes in the divine nature. So everything is God, everything partakes of the nature of God, everything has a little bit of God in it. But God, if you added everything in the universe, it wouldn't be equal to God, right? Because there's still something, an aspect of God that is outside of the universe. But add it all up together, combine it with that, and you got God. So it's panentheist. So human beings are a spark of the divine, and we are kind of trapped here, even though this world wasn't made as a trap. So the metaphor I would use would be something like, picture space, and you which actually has, comets are like a big chunk of comet is actually like ice and water and moisture. But imagine, okay, so if we're in the center of the universe, and we have this incredible cannon that shoots with incredible force. It's atom powered, right? There's at the top of the cannon, there's a bunch of water. In the bottom of the cannon is an A bomb. You let the A bomb off, and it turns the water into steam, and the steam goes shooting through the universe. Everybody following along with this great metaphor? You can picture that. You got a stream of steam that's flowing through the universe, right? So that's us. That's us after being emanated. Now, what happens when we hit a planet, right? So we're the steam. Well, first, let's say that we're hitting Earth and we're spot on. We're to the North Pole. So the steam is going through space because it's been propelled so much by that A-bomb. When it hits the atmosphere, of course, is a lot colder. There's friction now. It's going to slow everything down. And that steam is going to turn into water, right? And then when it hits the ground in the North Pole, it's going to turn into ice. It's heavy material. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just the way things are. So obviously that steam is not going anywhere without any help. It's now a pile of ice in the North Pole. So that's basically us. So how would we fix that problem? Well, you would set an A-bomb off again underneath the ice so that it would turn back into steam and be propelled back up into the cosmos. But we'll talk about that. Oh yeah, Mona has a great comment there. Reminds me of the scene in the movie Noah when the fallen angels are encased in matter. Yeah, so we just and of course we don't actually have the mythology. This is sort of an extrapolation. We don't know how we got here, but this seems to be what the Chaldean Oracles. In the Chaldean Oracles, because again it's fragments, but this seems to be what it's suggesting. This seems to be what's kind of similar to other Platonic books, or what's similar to some of the stuff that we see in the Corpus Hermeticum. So they use, so they do have a dualism of sort of soul and body, and they actually use a lot of metaphors that, once we've become ice, we forgot where we came from, we forgot that we're gods, we forgot our true identities, right, as divine beings, and that this is our home for now. Maybe the community that made the Chaldean Oracles or the Julians would say this, it's not an evil place, it's our home for now, but it's not our ultimate home. So we don't want to get too comfortable here or too caught up in the laws of this land. So it does use a lot of metaphors for being forgetful, for being drunk, and being asleep and need to be awakened. Right, and these are very familiar, very
classic, very kind of hem of the pearl metaphors that we see through a lot of Gnostic material. Yeah,
and then again,
it really does. You're on high rant, so I'm just going to pause you for a second.
Please, yeah.
So it really does speak to this kind of common worldview shared by, we're seeing, because we've got these disconnected sets of texts, that are associated with specific teachers, often who are arguing against each other. But partly what you're getting from the Chaldean Oracles and their kind of fragmentary nature, I guess, and this sense of the Platonic underworld going on at the time, is this sense that all these different kind of traditions are things living within swimming within a common worldview, drawing on a common set of concepts, and that the distinctions between them are really quite slight distinctions that may matter a great deal in terms of what that means you ought to do, but it's a very common set of concepts that everybody's reusing over and over again, and the structures are very common between them, right?
Yes, I think that's 100% correct. And I think we get to Gnosticism because, you can look at Gnosticism and say, well, you can find that somewhere else, you can find that somewhere else, you can find that somewhere else, you can find that in Paul, you can find that in Plato, you can find that here. But of course, it's that they're all there in that order, right? And of course, there is original stuff in Gnosticism, but there's stuff that to modern people may seem very Gnostic or important part of it, or must be original to the Gnostic text that, of course, we find elsewhere. So I think taking these common religious ideas, these common philosophical ideas, these common ideas about the cosmology that are floating around in the ancient world and lining them up in this specific way is how we get something that's Gnostic or Gnostic-y, right? Which is what excites me about this text.
Yeah. For sure.
It also too, I won't talk about pre-Christian Gnosticism, but it does make me wonder, if we have something that if people are in dialogue with the Gnostics so quickly and are reacting to them so quickly, and they're not Christian and they're not Gnostics, it's like, why are they so receptive, right? So is there something, in this Platonic underworld are there communities that are so similar to what becomes Gnosticism that you can almost say, well, they already had similar mythologies and they were pagan, they were already talking about things like this, right? So that we can sort of make a bit of a hypothetical lineage there. No, yes, a high rant, but I think something else that was actually a really excellent the bridgeway to something else, which is how the human being is constructed. Which again,
yeah, this is because this is the key. I mean, this is the key thing that kind of argues for any of this even being bothering. Unless you're an antiquarian or you're a scholar that's interested in the text themselves. So the key question I think has got to be like, okay, great, so what, right?
Yeah.
Because this is either bad cosmology because people didn't have decent telescopes, or it's trying to tell us something about the nature of the human being and the predicament of the human being in existence. And I guess most of us would argue for the latter rather than the former. That's why we're here, right? So
precisely.
What is this human being that's being? Each of these distinct things, each of these distinct traditions kind of argues for a slightly different wrinkle on what is the human being, and implied within the human being, like what is therefore what's the job? Like what are we here for? What are we meant to be doing? How is life to be lived? So there's two questions there, right? So which I'm going to directly ask you, John Stewart. You ready?
Yeah.
You braced?
Yeah.
What is the human being, and how is life to be lived?
Right. So the human being is ultimately divine, right? We are a spark of divinity, and we are meant for divine things and to live in existence of divinity, whatever that means, right? Not being attacked by the passions. So that's the first part. But the human being is sort of divided up into three parts, which is again not unique to Gnosticism. The tripartite division of the human being is very common in lots of different cultures in the ancient world, but it's pretty important in Gnosticism. So basically, you got something like body, soul, spirit, or body, mind, soul, body, mind, spirit, which is we have the body, which is actually the physical body, but along with the physical body is that's kind of counted as part of it, would be like the passions, or like the animal stuff of having a body, right? So that's also in our heads, right? Because if I get really angry or really stressed, that's partly animal, right? It's fight or flight. I think there's a saber-toothed tiger there. So that's the body. Then you have, what's the ultimate self, the divine self, which is the divine spark, or in this case, it's the soul. Okay. Now the Chaldean Oracles have, I believe, the term that they use, and this might be confusing, is vehicle, and the vehicle is the third thing, and the vehicle would be something like the soul in Cephianism. I think it's the spirit that's divine, and the soul is on top of it. This suddenly makes sense for why it's called a vehicle, and like why you're not calling the body the vehicle, because basically what it is it's our identity. It's the mind, right? It's what we think of as ourselves. It's what modern people would call the ego, right? So suddenly that makes sense that is the vehicle for the soul, because the soul is sort of driving around in there, the divine part. So we're going to talk about their I think for why this matters, and what the human is, right, is what the problems are and how do we fix them, which we can get into next, which I think is really, really important when talking about this text, because I think it says some pretty impressive things. It also, again, for coming into some very strong connections, it seems like the text might have divided humanity up into three sorts of people. There's
that's unfamiliar. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So the famously, for those who don't know, the Valentinians divided humanity up into the pneumatics, psychics, and hylics. Basically, one group is never going to get it, is not going to get enlightened, are going to live like animals on Earth. The other group is sort of predestined, is kind of born with the circumstances, are hot shit. Edit that, hot. They're hot, and they're going to get enlightened. And then you have the people in the middle who have the potential, right? Who are perhaps normal Christians going to church on Sunday, but don't have the gnosis.
Giving it their best. Yeah.
So check this out. What we have in this text, what some it's not laid out, but this is what some scholars have seen it in, is we have the herd, The herd are completely of this world, completely material. They're not going to get it. You have the middlemen who can work hard, and there's a chance that they'll get enlightened. And then you have the few who are going to be able to purify their souls, be completely saved. Sometimes within the few, it might be all of the few, or it might be some of the few, because there's still the idea that the few have to do spiritual work to get enlightened. But there does seem to be an idea that among the few, maybe all of them, maybe just some of them, actually come from a higher angelic order, come from one of the higher realms, didn't get stuck in this world and deliberately descend to save others. And then actually like stick around for a while. So it's a bodhisattva idea.
Right.
Maybe keep coming back. So the Chaldeans did have like they believed it does seem the community that created this. I shouldn't say the Chaldeans, but the Julians. I'll say the Julians believed in reincarnation. So basically, if you don't get enlightened, you go to Hades for a little while to be further purified. Then you're sent back to this world, right? If you do get enlightened, you get out and you reunite with the highest divinity. So yeah.
Who does the text imagine itself being addressed to? Is it addressed to the few or to the middle folks? Not to the herd, I assume.
Yeah, it seems I would guess, I think a lot of people would guess the middlemen, but it seems to be the few, right? Because it's part of it might be because it's so fragmentary, but it seems to be a complicated text. Some of the fragments we have are quite complicated. When I was talking about the cosmology, I still basically gave the easy version, right?
Simple version, yeah. So it's deeply esoteric, which means it's addressing itself to the few, really.
Yeah. I think it's for the few. It does seem to be that it was also might have had some more practical advice for theurgy. For ritual work. So I got from his evidence that we need to wrap up in 5 to 10 minutes. So quickly, I'll talk about enlightenment. So something that seems really interesting in the text is theurgy, which is ritual work, which is something like in between magic and sacraments. We very much, like Christian sacraments, something like the famously the Mass is a form of theurgy. Theurgy is God working. You're bringing the powers down to earth. Very interesting. We think about it, because the method of salvation is you do all these rituals, you bring down the powers to earth of higher and higher gods. Bringing down these powers gives you gnosis, right? Because they can tell you things, but they also give you gnosis because they are purifying your soul. So right. Of the passions, of the material stuff. So once you've done this course of theurgy, then you can start ascending. So you do rituals and probably some guided visualizations where you are like, I mentioned the 3 rings, right? But there seems to be rings within those 3 major rings within the 3 major worlds, which again is a very common idea in the Gnostics and ancient world. So you're going up one level. Often the levels are represented by the planets, right? So first purification, then ascent. You send up to the unknown father, or to the second intellect. It's unclear about which one it is, unclear about what it would be in Cephianism, right? Because the unknown father can't be known, but you are ascending up to higher divinity. You are also divine. You have a mystical experience where you become one with the ultimate divinity. So that's sort of how you get enlightened, how you become a better person, what have you. So there is this idea of sort of sacramental stuff, of Gnostic ascent, of theurgy, but something that seems to be very interesting is a lot of people seem to think that they did an organized form of meditation that's different from just philosophical contemplation. So we can kind of assume that they're doing philosophical contemplation and dialectical discussions to get gnosis. So you're reading books, right? You're reflecting on them. This is kind of like meditation. I mean, we do this with the Bible now, right? We see ourselves in the image, right? So we it's thought that ancient Platonists did this, and that this was more than just reading a book. It's spiritual practice. To discuss philosophy be a spiritual practice. But there's a few quotes like, to know the unknown father, to know the first intellect, I didn't write it down, you first have to empty your mind. And there's a few other quotes like that have to do with emptying the mind, how the mind can't be full of things, how the mind can't be divided, how you have to hold your concentration. That some scholars have thought that they must have had a developed form of meditation that would look a lot like what we know as mindfulness meditation, would look a lot like Buddhism. So that's what really fascinates me about this text, is is how you get enlightened. So you sort of have this mix of ritual work, of sacraments, of theurgy, and then what seems to be an organized form of mindfulness, an organized form of meditation. And I think too, this is good for kind of building bridges, because there's people in New Age communities and magical communities and Wiccan communities and pagan communities who are doing ritual work, or particularly for modern witches or Wiccans, are doing work with Hecate. Right, Hecate is traditionally the goddess of the witches and a whole bunch of other things. And I guess I don't have time to get into it, but Hecate is the divine feminine in this system, and is a very complicated figure.
In terms of like to make a relationship to the Sethian material, Hecate is the parallel to Barbelo or Pronoia or Protanoia or First Thought, right? That fully divine partner to the one that unfolds the initial emanations, the harmonious emanations at the beginning of the cosmology story.
That's it precisely. And then just like that figure, and again, these texts seem to be in dialogue with each other. So when you say like that figure, like, literally like that figure, like Barbelo, Barbelo.
The same language is used about both, right?
That's right. Same language used about both. Also, the sort of fractal elements of the identity of this emanation, because as you said, like Barbelo, also has lower aspects, right? Including the epinoia. Yes. Sophia is probably a lower aspect, and Eve herself is a lower aspect of it. So it does seem that the Hecate is also like that, and she's a very complicated figure, because they write about her in quite high ways, right? Like, she is the power, she is the glue that binds the universe together. But in her lower, there's suggestions, there's hints, there's weird stuff. So we don't have very quickly, we may not have a demiurge. Like, we don't, like, the demiurge is good. We don't have an evil creator. The text hints, some people think that, like, there's also like a whole bunch of like other gods and entities that are in this cosmos, right? And Hades might be the lord of this earth, and Hades might be sort of a negative figure, and is sort of in charge of the daemons here that inspire the passions, get into your head, and keep you here. So there is, what seems to be very obvious is that there are evil influences in this world that don't want you to get enlightened. The text makes that clear and says that they're daemons, and their ruler might be Hades, but the ruler might also be a lower aspect of Hecate. So there's weird stuff about Hecate in there where she's identified with nature, and then sometimes in a positive way, like as in nature, again, the power of life, of generation. That's good, right? But then there's also aspects of them being, nature can be very bad. And, I just read that nature destiny quote, right? There seems to be quotes where they seem to be down on nature, and then they associate Hecate with nature. And then they had some things about Hecate inflaming the passions. They refer to the daemons as dogs, and Hecate's traditionally associated with dogs. So, but at the same time, she's Sophia, and she's the liberator. And it does seem that some of this theurgical work was to summon, like, maybe one of the first steps, maybe the last steps, is to understand Hecate as Sophia, as wisdom. So you're actually trying to summon her in these rituals so that you can get gnosis. So it's very confusing and very complicated.
That's super interesting, because that makes me think of the sort of affirmative contradictions of Thunder Perfect Mind.
Yeah.
And thinking about that as a meditation on Pronoia or the nature of Barbelo, and how that's all super fascinating, which we don't have time to go into. So I want to just we're done, really. We're out of time. Yeah. So just to kind of wrap up a couple of things. So this is obviously fascinating in terms of like kind of understanding this kind of shared milieu amongst all these traditions at that time. This is obviously a fascinating text in terms of that, right? Yeah. There's some things in which it makes, and then there's specific things it connects, and what you were just talking about, I think, is one of them, and places where it kind of gives you a bridging kind of ideology between a lot of these other traditions, and that's super interesting. You've kind of alluded to a couple of places where it that capacity of the text to bridge between different traditions is also relevant in the present day. You've also talked about, it does lay out some program of spiritual practice, which according to the oracles is going to, if you are to live life well, these are the things that you need to do as a posited one of the few who's going to, reach union with the one. And that program of spiritual practice is not a terribly, like it, and it itself is interesting, right? Because it bridges theological esoteric kind of work, and there's often divisions, in our own community between the people that prefer to contemplative meditative work versus kind of over against esoteric theological work, and this kind of bridges those two things as possible stages in a larger program. Those are some obvious places that make it relevant to the present day. What else is on your mind as like why this text is relevant to modern day people?
I think the really complicated divine feminine, where we just don't have like a simple answer. She's both good and bad, and she really is. Hecate in this book really, I was going to mention Thunder Perfect Mind. I'm really glad you brought it up because it could fit her really well. I could picture somebody. For all I know, that text is about her. It easily could be, right? Somebody from the community that created the Chaldean Oracles could have sat down and wrote Thunder Perfect Mind, and it would fit the depiction of Hecate perfectly, right? So I think that's really important. I think too, the having resources for pagan Gnosticism, of understanding how influential Gnosticism is, right? So here we have this Gnostic-y text that was so influential on later stuff, and it goes right until the 1100s. So you have Selos, the great Byzantium thinker, writer, monk, advisor to I think multiple emperors. He wrote a commentary on it. It was still around in his time, and he interpreted strictly in a Christian lens. But the fact that you could interpret it in a heavily mystical Platonic Christian lens is fascinating, right? So I think it being influential and it was very influential on the occultists and Gnostics of the 1900s as well, right? Of the 18th century, 19th century, and early 20th century. So some quotes from the Chaldean Oracles, like Westcott from the Golden Dawn released a translation. There are quotes from the Chaldean Oracles in some of the Golden Dawn materials, right, and pop up in other places in that stream of thought. So, yeah.
So I wanted to move into, just because technically we're supposed to break now, and then we will return at 7 Mountain Time for the last talk of the day. So everybody's got an hour to eat, but I wanted to make sure that we got 10 minutes in for questions. So I wanted to shift into that, and I actually had a question of my own.
I do just want to say thanks for being on the show, Jonathan, and everyone, don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon.
That's right.
Thank you. Yeah,
like and subscribe on YouTube.
Button. Yeah, smash that like button.
So and this is, as we often joke about conclave talks, I've got a statement in the form of a question, right? Or perhaps the other way around. So I guess for me, chewing on this, this is something I talked about at the parish of St. Joseph the other day when we were talking about, I can't remember what we were talking about, but we were talking about a thing, and it referenced, there was a thing that I had heard. And the person isn't relevant to the interview. The quote is, so I was listening to an interview with Philip Cargam and he was talking about practicing multiple traditions and the value they kind of go into one another. And I thought he had a good analogy, so I thought I would apply it here. Is that, when folks kind of approach a single tradition or a single path, you get the monocular view. He used the word monocular. I would say there's a risk of, tunnel vision, right? But he said, the good thing about looking at traditions that are complementary or perhaps parallel, or even ones that are different, it allows you to get a binocular view, or the idea that essentially that having two of those things in the front view creates a depth of field, right? So that you can now perceive depth and difference and whatnot. So I guess my question would be, in terms of the relevance to modern Gnostics, or modern anything really, whether you look at, Hermeticism. I've actually got 2 questions, but so you look at these modern streams, but particularly modern Gnosticism. Do you think because we're awash in ancient traditions being practiced in the modern day that come with ancient cosmologies, do you think that the Chaldean Oracles have sufficient material or perspective to create a depth of field by which we can understand Gnosticism a bit better?
My quick question for that is just yes. right? I think both for some of these historical things that maybe aren't the main interest of people who are coming to a church. Although I know some laity definitely have some of the nerdy historical stuff, but I think it has relevancy for practice, for contemplation. The great thing is, because it's just quotes and it's mostly lost, you can read it in one sitting. That's always great when it comes to Gnosticy and Gnostic texts, because there's always another effing book to read, right? So here's one that you can read quick, and a lot of the quotes are short and punchy. There's a lot that will just kind of resonate and stick in your mind. Oh, by the way, it was written in poetry. It was in hexameter poetry. So the quotes are quite poetical, literally being poetry. So
well, that leads into my second question, because I think I've looked at them briefly years ago. So not having a familiarity with the text, I guess my question would be is that, given the text that we do have, I guess I would describe it, I would question, is it more reflective or productive, in the sense that, take the I guess kind of, the way folks talk about the Hermetica these days, where you have a philosophical Hermetica and you have a technical or practical Hermetica. The idea being is that there are texts that are the result of an experience, and then there are texts that are designed to generate an experience. And so I guess I would say, is the material that we have like primarily productive or reflective? Like, is it the result? Is it the end result of somebody's experience, or is it or are there practical elements that you can follow versus practical elements that you can infer?
From the fragments that we have, it is more the contemplative, here's something from somebody who already got it, right? Okay. So you can, and Dr. Government's saying both is good, which is true. And there are elements of both in there. And as I said, perhaps in the original form, I think it is thought that there was more guides about how to do things, but you can't get it's far from being able to recreate a practical system. There's a few references, right? And when I was mentioning the meditation, it does seem like they did combine meditation with theurgy as well, right? Possibly you'd meditate in the middle of a ritual, or meditation was viewed as you needed to have your stuff in order to be able to do theurgy, right? To start to do purification. So it might have been separate, but yeah, it's really fragmentary. And the quotes, nobody quoted a whole page about here's a ritual that you do. There's some references to magic wheels, a lot about fire. It does seem like maybe gazing into a candle, gazing into a blazing fire, seeing visions in the fire. There is instructions for making a statue of Hecate. It's very brief. So the idea being, I believe, one of the practices that they might have done that was really common in theurgy is drawing gods and spirits into statues. This kind of comes from the magical tradition where maybe you draw a spirit into a statue so you could ask it to heal you, or ask it for now that it's here, ask it where buried treasure is. In this case, you're probably pulling the god into a statue just so you're closer to it. Just being closer to it is kind of a sacramental thing that purifies the soul, and then possibly also ask it questions about holy things, about Gnostic things, about
well, I was going to say there's a I don't want to say lesser, but a more simplified or implied form of that in things like iconography, right? Like Byzantine iconography and prototype and archetype and those kind of things. The idea that if I have if I have a picture of my wife in my wallet, who carries pictures and who carries wallets? But if I have a picture, of my wife in my wallet, and I pull it out, that picture connects me in some way beyond simple remembrance, right? To all the things that are represented or embodied, I guess, in the image that connects to the thing. Like I look at the picture and it's like, oh crap, I didn't take out the garbage. So no, that's neat actually, because it makes me think of a continuum of ideas, where you have the ensoulment of statues, to the blessing of icons, that kind of thing. my dog is barking. I'm going to mute. Does anybody else have questions or comments or scowls?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, good. Well, Reverend Deacon Stewart, did you say that it's the Majersic translation?
That's right.
Is probably the best one to get as far as if you're going to get an edition of this to read?
Yeah. And hey, you probably pronunciated it better than me. I would say
I'm looking at it on this other computer, so.
Okay, I'd say that's definitely the best translation, and she also has a lot of material, the great intro, and then she has commentary on each of the 200 and some sayings. She was also a student of John Turner's, I think, so maybe possibly she has more of a Gnostic bias than other people could. I don't know. I don't know enough about the scholarship on it, but yeah, Dr. Copperman's saying he recommends it. Oh yeah, the title is just simply the Chaldean Oracles, I believe, by Majersic. So highly recommend picking it up. Yeah, and you can also find because it was translated in the 1800s and early 20th century, there are versions that are at a copyright that you can find online, right? But the translation is not as good. So. Cool.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to, we will take a break, and we will, so people can have dinner, run errands, do whatever they're going to do. We will take a break, and we will resume at 7 p.m. Mountain Time for the talk on Aphantasia from Father Brendan Humberdross.